The stadium was a sea of noise, cheers, screams, and the pounding of feet against metal bleachers. The scoreboard glared down like a judge. 2-1. 2 minutes left. Thomas stood at the edge of the penalty box, his chest heaving, sweat dripping into his eyes. The ball was a blur as it zipped across the field, but his focus was razor sharp. This was it. The moment that would define his life. But no one believed he'd make it this far. Not his coach, not his teammates, not even himself. Flashbacks flickered in his mind like a broken film reel. The coach's sneer, "You're not good enough, Thomas. Stick to the bench." The snickers from his teammates as they walked past him in the locker room. The nights he spent alone in his backyard, kicking a deflated ball against a rusted fence, his only audience the moon and the crickets. The whistle blew, snapping him back to the present. His teammate passed him the ball, and Thomas felt the weight of it at his feet. This wasn't just a game anymore. It was his chance to prove them all wrong. The crowd roared as he sprinted down the field, dodging defenders like they were standing still. His heart pounded in his ears, louder than the cheers. He could see the goalie's eyes, wide and nervous, as he closed in. This was his moment, his shot, his redemption. But as he pulled his leg back to strike, a voice in his head whispered, "What if you miss? What if you're not good enough?" Thomas shut it out. He wasn't that scared kid anymore. He was Thomas, the boy who trained with nothing but a dream and a deflated ball. And he wasn't about to let that dream slip away. The ball left his foot like a rocket, soaring through the air. Time seemed to slow as it arced toward the goal. Would it go in? Or would it shatter everything he'd worked for? The crowd held its breath. So did Thomas. Thomas's story didn't start on a pristine field under stadium lights. It began in a small, crumbling house on the outskirts of Dallas, where the walls were thin, the roof leaked when it rained, and dinner was often just rice and beans. His parents, Maria and Joseph, worked tirelessly, his mother as a cleaner, his father as a janitor. But no matter how hard they tried, money was always tight. Still, their home was filled with love, laughter, and a stubborn hope that things would get better. Thomas was the youngest of 4 kids, and from the moment he could walk, he was obsessed with football. He didn't have a fancy ball or shiny cleats like the other kids in his neighborhood. His ball was an old, deflated thing he found in a dumpster, patched up with duct tape. His shoes were hand-me-downs, so worn that the soles flapped with every step. But none of that mattered to Thomas. When he played, he felt alive. Their backyard was his sanctuary. It wasn't much, just a patch of dirt with a rusted fence and a few weeds stubbornly pushing through the cracks. But to Thomas, it was his stadium. He'd stack 2 broken chairs and drape a torn bedsheet between them to make a goal. Every morning, before the sun even peeked over the horizon, he'd be out there, dribbling, shooting, and practicing his moves. His parents watched him from the kitchen window, their hearts swelling with pride and aching with guilt. They wanted to give him more: new shoes, a proper ball, maybe even a chance to join a real team. But they could barely afford to keep the lights on. "Mama, one day I'm going to play for Real Madrid," Thomas would say, his eyes shining with dreams bigger than their little backyard. Maria would smile, brushing his curls away from his forehead. "I know you will, mijo. Just keep working hard." But not everyone believed in Thomas. At school, the other kids mocked him. "Why do you even bother?" they'd sneer. "You'll never be good enough." Thomas would just shrug and keep playing. He didn't have the words to explain it, but football was more than a game to him. It was his escape, his passion, his way of proving that even a kid from nothing could be something. One day, after hours of practicing, Thomas collapsed onto the dirt, his chest heaving. He looked up at the sky, the stars twinkling like tiny diamonds. "I'm going to make it," he whispered to no one but himself. "I don't know how, but I will." And in that moment, under the vast Texas sky, Thomas made a promise. He wouldn't let the lack of money, the worn-out shoes, or the doubters stop him. He'd keep training, keep dreaming, and keep fighting. Because somewhere deep inside, he knew his story wasn't over. It was just beginning. When Thomas finally made it onto his school's football team, he thought it would be the start of something amazing. But reality hit him hard, and fast. From the very first practice, it was clear he didn't belong, at least not in the eyes of his coach and teammates. The coach, a gruff man with a permanent scowl, barely acknowledged Thomas. No matter how hard he trained or how well he played during practice, Thomas was always benched. "You're not ready," the coach would say, his tone sharp and dismissive. But Thomas could see the truth in his eyes. It wasn't about skill, it was about the color of his skin. His teammates weren't any better. They'd whisper behind his back, loud enough for him to hear. "Why is he even here? He's just taking up space." During drills, they'd purposely pass the ball to everyone but him. And when he did get a chance to play, they'd roll their eyes or make snide comments if he missed a shot. Thomas tried to brush it off. He told himself it didn't matter. But deep down, it hurt. Every snicker, every sidelong glance, every time the coach ignored him, it chipped away at his confidence. One afternoon, after yet another practice where he'd been benched the entire time, Thomas stayed late to train alone. He was dribbling the ball across the field when he heard voices coming from the coach's office. The window was slightly open, and the words drifted out like a poison. "Thomas? He'll never make it," the coach said, his voice dripping with disdain. "He's just here to fill the roster. Let's be honest, kids like him don't have what it takes." Thomas froze, the ball slipping from his feet. His chest tightened, and for a moment, he couldn't breathe. Kids like him. The words echoed in his mind, sharp and cutting. He wanted to storm into the office, to yell, to demand an explanation. But he didn't. Instead, he just stood there, his fists clenched, his eyes burning with unshed tears. That night, Thomas lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. Anger simmered in his chest, but beneath it was something deeper. Sadness. A crushing, heavy sadness that made his throat ache. Why did they hate him so much? What had he ever done to them? But then, like a spark in the darkness, another feeling emerged. Determination. A fierce, unshakable resolve that burned brighter than the hurt. They thought he wasn't good enough? Fine. He'd show them. He'd prove them all wrong. The next day, Thomas showed up to practice with a fire in his eyes. He ran harder, trained longer, and pushed himself further than ever before. When the coach ignored him, he didn't let it break him. When his teammates mocked him, he used it as fuel. Every insult, every slight, every moment of doubt, they all became part of the fire that drove him forward. There were nights when he wanted to give up, nights when the weight of it all felt too heavy to carry. But then he'd think about his parents, working long hours just to put food on the table. He'd think about his little backyard, the deflated ball, and the dreams he'd whispered to the stars. And he'd keep going. Because Thomas wasn't just playing for himself. He was playing for every kid who'd ever been told they weren't good enough. For every dreamer who'd been laughed at, overlooked, or pushed aside. He was playing to prove that talent and heart could overcome even the deepest prejudice. And he was ready to show the world what he was made of. It happened during the semifinals of the regional tournament. The team's star player, Jake, went down hard after a tackle, clutching his ankle and screaming in pain. The coach's face turned pale as the medics rushed onto the field. Jake was out, and the team was in trouble. Thomas sat on the bench, his heart pounding. He knew what was coming. The coach's eyes scanned the bench, hesitating for a moment before landing on Thomas. "Get in there," he barked, his voice tight with reluctance. This was it. Thomas's chance. From the moment his feet hit the field, everything changed. The ball felt like an extension of his body as he dribbled past defenders with ease. His passes were sharp, his shots precise. The crowd, initially silent, began to murmur as they watched this unknown kid dominate the game. By the time the final whistle blew, Thomas had scored 2 goals and assisted another. His team won 3-1, and for the first time, his teammates looked at him with something other than disdain. It wasn't quite respect, not yet, but it was close. The buzz around Thomas grew with each game. Scouts from local clubs started showing up, their eyes glued to the boy with the worn-out shoes and unstoppable drive. Even the coach, though he never said it out loud, began to give Thomas more playing time. But the real test came during the final game. The stakes were high. The winner would advance to the national championship. The opposing team was tough, their defense nearly impenetrable. By halftime, Thomas's team was down 1-0, and the pressure was crushing. The second half was a blur of sweat, screams, and sheer determination. Thomas pushed himself harder than ever, his legs burning with every sprint. With just 5 minutes left on the clock, he saw an opening. A defender slipped, and Thomas seized the moment, darting past him with the ball at his feet. The crowd roared as he charged toward the goal. He could see the goalie's eyes, wide and panicked, as he positioned himself for the shot. But Thomas didn't hesitate. He pulled his leg back and struck the ball with everything he had. Time seemed to slow as the ball soared through the air. The goalie lunged, his fingertips brushing the ball but not stopping it. The net rippled as the ball hit the back of it, and the stadium erupted in cheers. Thomas stood frozen for a moment, his chest heaving, before his teammates rushed him, lifting him onto their shoulders. For the first time, they weren't mocking him or ignoring him. They were celebrating him. The final whistle blew, and Thomas's team won 2-1. As the crowd chanted his name, Thomas looked over at the coach. The man who doubted him, benched him, and written him off was now clapping, slowly, reluctantly, but clapping nonetheless. In that moment, Thomas knew he'd proven them all wrong. But this was just the beginning. The tournament ended, but the buzz around Thomas didn't. Word of his incredible performance spread like wildfire, and soon, scouts from some of the biggest clubs in the country were asking about him. But it was the White Lions FC, a prestigious academy known for producing world-class talent, that made the first move. Thomas was sitting in his living room, still wearing his worn-out shoes, when the call came. His mother answered the phone, her hands trembling as she listened to the voice on the other end. When she hung up, tears streamed down her face. "Thomas," she whispered, her voice breaking. "They want you. The White Lions. They want you to join their academy." For a moment, Thomas couldn't speak. He just stared at his mother, his mind racing. This was the dream he'd been chasing since he was a little boy, kicking a deflated ball in their backyard. And now, it was real. The next few days were a whirlwind of emotions. Thomas's parents hugged him tightly, their tears mixing with his. His siblings cheered, their faces lit up with pride. Even the neighbors who'd once ignored him came by to congratulate him. But the most surreal moment came when Thomas walked into the White Lions training facility for the first time. The pristine fields, the state-of-the-art equipment, the professional coaches. It was like stepping into another world. As he laced up his brand new cleats, he couldn't help but think about the old, worn-out shoes he'd left behind. The coaches at White Lions saw something special in Thomas. They didn't care about where he came from or what he looked like. All they cared about was his talent, his drive, and his heart. For the first time in his life, Thomas felt like he belonged. Training was tough, grueling even, but Thomas thrived. He pushed himself harder than ever, determined to make the most of this opportunity. And with every passing day, he grew stronger, faster, and more confident. But Thomas never forgot where he came from. Every night before he went to bed, he'd look at the photo of his family he kept on his nightstand. They were his why, the reason he kept going, no matter how hard it got. This was just the beginning of his journey, and Thomas was ready to take on the world. Thomas's journey with the White Lions FC was just the beginning. His talent was undeniable, and it wasn't long before the world took notice. Scouts from Real Madrid, one of the most iconic football clubs in the world, came calling. When they offered him a spot on their roster, Thomas couldn't believe it. Real Madrid. The club he'd dreamed of playing for since he was a kid, kicking a deflated ball in his backyard. Signing with Real Madrid was a dream come true, but it was also the start of a new chapter filled with challenges. The pressure was immense, the competition fierce. But Thomas thrived. He trained harder than anyone else, staying late after practice to perfect his skills and studying game footage to learn from the best. His hard work paid off. Soon, he was scoring goals, breaking records, and becoming a fan favorite. Fame and fortune followed. Thomas went from a boy with worn-out shoes to a global icon, his face splashed across billboards and magazines. But through it all, he never forgot where he came from. He used his platform to speak out against discrimination, sharing his story to inspire others who faced similar struggles. "No one should be judged by the color of their skin," he said in interviews. "Talent and heart are what matter." One of the most heartwarming moments of Thomas's rise to fame came when he surprised his parents with a new house. He'd saved up his earnings and bought them a beautiful home in a quiet neighborhood, far from the crumbling house where he'd grown up. When he handed them the keys, tears streamed down their faces. "You did this, mijo," his mother said, pulling him into a tight hug. "We're so proud of you." But Thomas didn't stop there. He started a foundation to help underprivileged kids pursue their dreams, providing them with equipment, training, and scholarships. He returned to his old neighborhood, hosting football clinics and inspiring the next generation of players. For Thomas, success wasn't just about fame or money. It was about making a difference, about proving that no matter where you start, you can achieve greatness if you have heart, grit, and the courage to keep going. And as he stood on the field at Santiago Bernabéu Stadium, the crowd chanting his name, Thomas knew one thing for sure: his journey was far from over. Thomas's story is one of resilience, determination, and unshakable belief. From a boy with a deflated ball in a dusty backyard to a global icon on the world's biggest stage, his journey is a testament to the power of dreams. He faced prejudice, doubt, and countless obstacles, but he never gave up. Instead, he used every challenge as fuel to push harder, run faster, and dream bigger. Today, Thomas isn't just a football star. He's a symbol of hope. He's proof that no matter where you start, your dreams are valid. That talent and heart can overcome even the toughest odds. And that success isn't just about reaching the top, it's about lifting others up along the way. As Thomas looks back on his journey, he knows it wasn't just about football. It was about breaking barriers, inspiring change, and showing the world that greatness comes in all colors, shapes, and backgrounds. So, to anyone out there chasing a dream, remember this: all you need is heart, grit, and the courage to keep going. Because if Thomas can do it, so can you.